There's no pipe running into this yard, no well hidden under the ground, and it hasn't rained here for days. And yet, look at that. Water, dripping slowly into that container, one drop at a time. Steady, quiet, like it's been happening all night, because it has. That right there is drinking water, not pumped from underground, not delivered through a pipe, but pulled straight out of the air while I was asleep. And the small system making it happen, it cost less than $10 to build. Now, before you assume this is some strange modern gadget or experimental technology, it's not. In fact, people living in some of the driest places on Earth have used versions of this idea for a very long time, which raises a strange question. If the air around us is already carrying water, why do almost none of us collect it? What you're looking at is a very simple kind of water collector. Sometimes people call them fog collectors, sometimes dew harvesters. Different places have different names for them, but the idea is always the same. The air around us is almost never completely dry. Even in places that look dusty or barren, the atmosphere is still carrying invisible moisture. When that moving air meets the right surface, something cool, textured, and angled correctly, tiny droplets begin to form, enough droplets, and they start to run together. And once gravity takes over, they drip. In coastal villages in Chile, large mesh collectors capture water from ocean fog that rolls inland every morning. In parts of Morocco, similar systems have been used to provide drinking water to communities where wells were unreliable. Even in the Canary Islands, fog nets quietly pull water from the air day after day. None of this requires pumps, no electricity, no complicated machinery. Just air moving through the right kind of surface. And the strange thing is, the basic version of that system is simple enough that almost anyone can build one. One of the strange things about modern life is how completely we've learned to depend on large systems we never actually see. Turn the faucet and water appears, flip a switch and electricity flows, walk into a store and food is waiting on the shelf. All of those things come from vast networks, pipes, treatment plants, farms, trucks, power stations, systems that are incredibly complex and usually far away from where we live. Because those systems work most of the time, we stop noticing something important. Nature already runs smaller systems of its own. Every morning, dew forms on grass and leaves without anyone pumping it there. Fog drifts through forests and quietly coats branches with moisture. Even a spider's web can gather tiny droplets from the air overnight. These are small, quiet processes happening all around us. Hidden systems. Most of the time, they're too subtle to notice. But once you start paying attention to them, you realize something interesting. With just a little structure and the right materials, you can guide those natural processes to work for you. And that's exactly what this simple water collector does. To understand why this works, you only need to notice something you've probably seen hundreds of times. Think about a cold glass of water on a warm day. After a few minutes, the outside of the glass starts to get wet. Tiny droplets appear, even though nothing spilled. That water didn't come from inside the glass, it came from the air around it. The air always carries some amount of invisible water vapor. When that moving air touches a surface that's slightly cooler than the surrounding air, the vapor can no longer stay suspended. It condenses, turning back into liquid. That's the same reason you see dew covering grass early in the morning. It's the same reason spiderwebs suddenly sparkle with droplets when the sun comes up. And it's the same reason fog leaves moisture behind on trees, rocks, and buildings as it moves through a landscape. There's even a specific temperature where this happens most easily. It's called the dew point, the moment when air simply can't hold its moisture anymore. When that happens, water has only one place to go, out of the air, and onto whatever surface it touches. So the idea behind a fog or dew collector is surprisingly simple. You just give that moisture a better place to land. A large surface, exposed to moving air, angled so gravity can guide the droplets downward once they form. After that, physics does the rest. The collector we're building today is really just a very simple version of that idea. At its core, the system only has three parts. First, a large mesh surface that the air can move through. This is where the real work happens. As humid air passes through the mesh, tiny droplets begin forming along the fibers. Second, a lightweight frame that holds that mesh upright and stretched tight. The frame doesn't need to be fancy. Its only job is to keep the surface exposed to moving air and angled correctly. And third, a small trough or gutter at the bottom to catch the water once it starts dripping. That's it. Air moves through the mesh. Moisture condenses into droplets. Gravity pulls those droplets downward, and the trough collects them. There are no motors turning, no pumps pushing water, no electricity running through the system. Once it's set up, the entire process happens quietly in the background. usually overnight when temperatures drop and condensation becomes easier. By morning, what started as invisible moisture floating through the air can turn into something very practical sitting in a container below. And the materials needed to build this system are surprisingly simple. The materials for a basic collector like this are surprisingly ordinary. In fact, most of them can be found at any garden center or hardware store. The most important piece is the mesh itself. A section of shade cloth or fine mesh netting works very well for this. Something around 6 by 6 feet is a good starting size. The tighter the weave, the better, because more surface area means more places for moisture to form droplets. Next is the frame. For that, simple PVC pipe works perfectly. 4 pieces are enough to create a rectangular frame that holds the mesh upright. PVC is lightweight, inexpensive, and easy to cut, which makes it ideal for a small project like this. To secure the mesh to the frame, a handful of zip ties is usually all you need. They're fast, strong, and make it easy to stretch the mesh tight across the structure. At the bottom, you'll want something to collect the water once it starts dripping. A short section of plastic gutter works well, though even a shallow tray or channel can do the job. And finally, a few bricks or stones help prop the frame at the correct angle. Altogether, depending on what you already have at home, the total cost usually ends up somewhere between $10 and $15. Once you have the materials, putting the system together is fairly straightforward. Start by assembling the frame. The PVC pipes form a simple rectangle. Roughly 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide works well for a basic collector. It doesn't need to be perfectly precise. The goal is simply to create a stable surface that can hold the mesh without sagging. Next, stretch the mesh across the frame. Pull it tight and secure it along the edges using zip ties every few inches. The tighter the mesh is stretched, the better the system works. If the mesh sags, water droplets can collect and pool instead of running downward, which slows the whole process. Now comes the most important detail: the angle. One of the most common mistakes people make when experimenting with these collectors is placing the mesh flat or nearly horizontal. When that happens, droplets sit on the surface and often evaporate once the sun comes up. Instead, you want to tilt the frame slightly, usually somewhere between 15 and 30 degrees. Think of it like leaning a panel against a wall. That angle allows gravity to guide the droplets downward once they form. Place the collection trough directly beneath the lower edge of the mesh so the water can drip straight into it. Location also matters. Ideally, the collector should face the direction of the prevailing wind, so air flows through the mesh instead of around it. Raising the structure slightly off the ground can also improve results, since cooler, more humid air tends to move a bit higher above the surface. Set it up in the evening, let the night air move through the mesh, and check the container again in the morning. The first time I set up a small collector like this, the conditions were pretty ordinary. No fog rolling in from the ocean, no heavy humidity, just a typical cool night. By morning, there was a little more than half a liter of water sitting in the container. That might not sound like much at first, but considering the system had no power source, no moving parts, and cost less than $10 to build, it's actually a surprisingly good result. And those were very average conditions. In places with higher humidity, coastal areas, river valleys, or regions where morning fog is common, collectors of this size can often produce 1 or even 2 liters of water overnight. And like many simple systems, the real power comes from scaling. If you increase the size of the mesh surface, you increase the number of droplets forming at the same time. Larger panels or multiple collectors placed side by side can dramatically increase the total amount of water produced. Some communities that rely on fog harvesting use mesh structures several meters wide, quietly producing hundreds of liters of water every day, which means even a small backyard version can become a surprisingly useful backup source of water. One question people often ask once they see this working is simple: can you actually drink the water? In many cases, atmospheric water starts out surprisingly clean. It hasn't traveled through soil, picked up sediment from rivers, or moved through long pipe systems. In many ways, it begins as relatively pure condensation. However, as droplets collect on the mesh and flow downward, they can pick up small particles, dust, pollen, or traces from the surface they touch. Because of that, it's always a good idea to filter the water before drinking. Fortunately, a very simple filter can be made in just a few minutes. Take an ordinary plastic bottle and cut the bottom off. Turn it upside down so the neck points downward. Inside the bottle, layer a few basic materials. Start with a small layer of cotton at the bottom to catch fine particles. Above that, add activated charcoal, which helps absorb impurities and improve taste. Then add a thin layer of clean sand, followed by another light layer of cotton at the top. Pour the collected water through the filter and let gravity do the rest. In many situations, that simple setup is enough for basic purification, and if you want to be extra cautious, boiling the water for a few minutes can add another level of safety. What's fascinating about projects like this isn't just that they work, it's how long humans have quietly known about ideas like this. Long before modern plumbing systems existed, people living in difficult environments had to pay close attention to the small patterns of nature around them. In the mountains of South America, the Inca built stone structures designed to collect moisture from fog drifting through high valleys. On the Canary Islands, fog nets have captured drinking water from passing clouds for generations. Even archaeologists studying ancient desert settlements have discovered structures that appear to have been designed specifically to condense water from nighttime air. None of these systems relied on complex machinery. They relied on observation, understanding how air moves, how temperatures change overnight, how tiny droplets form and gather. Over time, as large infrastructure systems became common, most of us stopped paying attention to these smaller natural processes. The tap worked, so the old knowledge slowly faded into the background, but the systems themselves never disappeared. They're still there, quietly operating all around us. And sometimes, with a few simple materials and a little curiosity, you can bring one of those hidden systems back to life. Now you know how.